Hello, I'm Barbara Sills Nevergold, co-founder of the Uncrowned Queens Institute. Welcome to They've Got Stories to Tell, Conversations with Uncrowned Community Builders. Like our previous series, Illuminations, this program will bring you the inspiring and sometimes little-known stories of the women and men who have made a difference in their community through their contributions and accomplishments in the arts, business, healthcare, education, politics, media, advocacy, and so much more. Today's guest is an amazing young woman who has almost single-handedly researched, written, and developed exhibits, videos, and much more recounting the extensive history of this community's first Black architect. She has also founded an organization that is dedicated to engaging the community in recovering the history of Buffalo's African American community. In fact, we will be working together on some exciting projects, but we'll save that for another show. Let me welcome Christine Castro-Parker to They've Got Stories to Tell. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nevergold. It's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon.
Well, you know, we've talked so many times, and I've asked you for your bio umpteen times, and then we finally got it.
Yes.
So as a result of that, I had the opportunity to look at, you know, your life story a little bit. And one of the things that is so amazing to me, or interesting to, is the fact that your family really represents the African diaspora, you know, in your ancestors and in your family members. And I know that some of our viewers may know your mother, Reverend Clara Castro.
Yes.
But tell us a bit about your family history, because it's a very interesting and an important history.
Thank you. Well, yes, it is. We're sort of a little, melting pot of the Caribbean, Latino, as well as the West Indian culture and Africa, our links to Africa. Certainly, starting with my mother's side, is rich in the West Indian and Mexican cultures. My great-grandmother, Clemencia Faulkner, was raised and born in the tiny little island of Anegada, which is northwest of Tortola. And she came to Buffalo in 1913 as an indentured servant, and she worked as a nanny in Perry, New York, and for a family that migrated from Devonshire, England, and they were cobblers in Perry, New York, and actually the building is still standing as a cobbler factory. And so she worked in that field for a while, and then she comes to Lackawanna, where her brother, first in Fernham Boulevard, had a boarding home. Uncle Osmond, very colorful character, ran the boarding home, and my great-grandfather was a resident there. He had come from Mexico, Los Sonoran, Mexico, and Santos boarded the Santa Fe train, and his father told him, go as far east as you can. And of course, I guess the last stop for him was going to be Buffalo, and made it there, and they had one daughter, and her name was Stephanie Barrios. And my grandmother is the founder and was the executive director for 27 years of the Puerto Rican Cultural Community Center that stood on Swan Street.
Well, you know, her name is familiar to me, too, and I'm pretty sure that I was aware of her, not of the connection. But you're Buffalonian, right? And so you also went to Buffalo schools. And one of the schools, again, you know, Buffalo's such a, what we call it, a small room, or maybe a big room. But anyway, a room nonetheless, because one of your brothers, Pedro Castro, was one of my students when I taught at Southside.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, but tell me a little bit about, you know, growing up in Buffalo, being a South Buffalonian, again, somewhat non-traditional in that most African Americans, African American Latino families lived on the east side of Buffalo, and very few lived in South Buffalo.
Which is really weird. My mom went back to her roots. Certainly, I was born on South Division Street, where the ballpark sits today. part of the park. And then we moved to Lemon Street. And lived there and Locust Street in the Fruit Belt.
I lived in the Fruit Belt too.
Yeah, so then
2 years before you.
and then Johnson and Best Street, and then my parents decided we would move to South Buffalo, which was where she was raised on Amelia Street, and so we lived there with our West Indian family because they lived on the streets of Moraga, Pembina, Mystic, O'Connor Street, and my mother, we enrolled us at school 28, so I was in 3rd grade when by the time we got over to South Side and the south part of the city, and had some of her same teachers that educated her. So which really was, fabulous. Like I remember my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Butler, who taught me my penmanship. And she said, "Oh, you're gonna go very far." And I was just very meticulous in drawing my letters, and I remember that. And then going over to Southside, and
well, quickly, because I mean, I hate to stop you here, but we're going to run out of time in a minute. Because again, as I mentioned about non-traditional, I know you said when you went off when you completed high school, going to college, the path you took was not quite the path of going right to college after high school. No,
well, I enrolled right in the fall year to attend Houghton College. I didn't like it. I dropped out and went to work and got married and had my children. And then all of a sudden at the age of 50, I was so inspired by President Obama's election, then Senator Obama. And I had a conversation with him on the television, which people may think is kind of weird, but I was assisting my daughter in recording the results from the Electoral College, and I said, "Okay, it's getting late. You need to go to bed, and we'll discuss this in the morning." And I sat there and I said, "I'm getting ready to witness history." I said, "Okay, Mr. Obama, if you make it to the White House, I'm going to go back to school." And that's how it all started. So returning back to school, by the time I got used to FOSFA and all the other crazy quirks that you have to do to get ready, I then enrolled at Erie Community College, city campus, and 2 years I graduated with my associates in the humanities, and then went on over to Buff State, which I thought would be a challenge for me to get in there. I don't know why I was so afraid. And 2 years after that, I received my bachelor's in history, an arts history degree, and then went on to achieve my master's.
And that's where the next part of your story begins, because that has led you to many different things, but most importantly, a study of a fantastic individual that I spoke about at the beginning of the show, the first African-American architect in Buffalo. So we'll find out who he is when we return, but we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Christine Castro-Parker.
Along with weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritis pain.
Hello, I'm Barbara Sills Nevergold, and welcome back to They've Got Stories to Tell, Conversations with Uncrowned Community Builders. And my guest today is Christine Castro-Parker. And when we left, when we took the brief break, we were just getting to the point about your story and getting you into college, into your master's program. And here we're going to get into, I think a conversation about a really significant project that you initiated as a student, and now it has taken you on to a vocation, into a profession. But I'd like to talk a bit about the individual, the professor, who really is instrumental in, I think, identifying and we'll say Mr. John Brent is the architect we're talking about, identifying Mr. Brent and his history as being significant.
Well, Mr. Brent, John Edmondson Brent, was Buffalo's first African-American architect. So he is a graduate of Tuskegee Normal, and then attends Drexel Institute in Philadelphia, and comes to Buffalo in June of 1912 to begin his architectural career. And so he works for several noted architects of the time: Max Byroll, Julius C. Schultz, Robert North, Chester Oakley, and oh my goodness, so many more architects as a draftsman. And then he has an opportunity to work for the Department of the Interior, where he went back to his roots in D.C., and he was assigned to a team of architects to design Frederick Douglass Hall and the Founders Library there at Howard University. And so John Brent was also a registered architect and had very few commissions, but the largest commission that he had was the Michigan Avenue YMCA here in Buffalo. And he was the second African-American architect to win a commission to design an exclusive YMCA for the African-American community.
The second one in the nation,
In
but
the
the first in
nation.
Buffalo.
Yes.
And I want to say, although our biography on Uncrowned Queens and Mr. Brent, you know, is comprehensive in a sense, it certainly doesn't touch on the depth that you've been able to research about his life. I know that you've worked on a video, you've worked on an exhibit, you're working on a book.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about any one of those projects.
Well, I think what really, part of my academia experience at Buff State, it started at my last semester as an undergraduate student, and Dr. Felix Armfield, who passed away unfortunately just 2 weeks before graduation, handed me this project to do a preliminary, you know, research. Is anything still standing? What else did he do that was significant? Because I believe out of the Michigan Street Heritage Corridor, that commission actually now establishes some information about Mr. Brent and his contribution to that particular corridor. So when the project was given to me, I was just amazed, like, you got to be kidding me. And so I started to research and trying to find my way. I never did research on that level before. Certainly it turned into being a very comprehensive, a very large catalog of Mr. Brent's contribution.
And it's and just so our viewers understand, and I know that some of them do, and we have some photos of Mr. Brent, the Michigan Avenue YMCA that he designed in 1928.
1928.
That opened up is no longer there.
No.
But certainly I think a number of our viewers probably still remember it and probably attended it as well.
Oh,
in
yes.
terms of it was just a central meeting place and educational site for members of this community, African American members.
Absolutely. And you know, during the research, when I then was enrolled in my master's program, of course, it was the focus. It was my thesis. It was, okay, I guess I'm a super student, so I decided I was going to do 2 projects, and just unearthed so many treasures where...
Well, tell me a bit about the exhibit, because that's, you know, that was at the Birchville Penny.
Right.
Which again is, you know, I think significant because you opened up the history beyond our community, and it's important for non-African Americans. It's certainly important for African American youth, but very important for the community to understand the contributions that African Americans have made to this community.
Yes, well, the exhibit was, a lot of people don't understand the relationship between the Birchfield Penny and Buffalo State College. Certainly, Birchfield Penny Art Center was birthed out of the college. It had its residency first in Rockwell Hall, then this new structure is built. So it's part of the Museum Studies program where students lend, that's part of the open classroom experience that we have. So here it is, we designed this great exhibit that showed Mr. Brent's contributions in several, actually 8 different areas, his family, religion, education. Then I broke down his career. We didn't showcase anything with his draftsman career, but certainly him as a registered architect and working as Buffalo's first African-American landscape architect for the city of Buffalo.
And you found a little known piece of history regarding the Buffalo Zoo and Mr. Brent.
Yes, that was Mr. Brent's long-term assignment for the Parks Department. He transformed the Buffalo Zoo from a outline to a modern facility in 1935 up until really the 1959 when he was forced to retire. So, you know, the zoo gates that are located near the Giraffe House, gates 1 and 2, along with the roundabout that's situated there at Parkside and Amherst, is placed on the National Register for Historic Places. And now there's a second exhibition getting ready to happen.
Really?
It's going to be at the Carpellis Porter Avenue Museum. I am working with Preservation Buffalo Niagara. We are going to be opening up several more post-grad discoveries of Mr. Brent, and we're going to be placing those on the National Register. And a lot of those places are right inside of Martin Luther King Park, and very excited about that.
And do you have a date for that already?
Yes, November 17th. It'll be just 3 weeks.
Okay.
And we're going to be showcasing, screening through these gates, the documentary.
Excellent. Well, you didn't talk, I mean, like I said, there's so many things, but you also did a documentary associated with the life or telling the life of Mr. Brent.
Right.
And that one is entitled Through These Gates.
Through These Gates.
As was the exhibit as well.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And so, of course, you know, you lend your great historical perspective on Mr. Brent and the contributions and what it means to African Americans here in Buffalo. And not just here in Buffalo, I think it's nation and even internationally.
Yes.
Dr. Lillian Williams, transnational professor over at University of Buffalo. And then, of course, Mayor Brown did the introduction. And it's getting ready to go on Amazon in a few weeks. We were trying to get it in time for his birthday to be launched, but it'll be on sale by September. Through these gates, you'll be able to log on to Amazon.com.
So you have an exhibit, you have a video, you have another exhibit coming up, and you also said, I think when we talked earlier, that you're working on a biography.
Actually, there's 2. We had to divide it.
We don't have enough time, but quickly, because before we go to our next break.
The first book is going to be called Out of the Shadows, and it's a biographical, geographical index of African American architects here in Buffalo and the professionals that support them.
Okay.
Yes, that's going to be quite interesting. And that'll be coming out in actually in February. And then we have his biography, which will be actually taken from my theses, and it's going to be somewhat my journey and how I discovered this great gentleman.
Fantastic, fantastic. So much. Well, we're going to come back. We're going to take another brief break, and we're going to come back with Christine, and we're going to talk about an organization that she has initiated, she started, and she'll tell us more about Sankofa when we come back. Stay with us, please.
Save a place for me, save a space for me, in your heart, in your heart.
Every year, the United Negro College Fund helps thousands of students go to college. But for everyone we help, there's one we can't. Please support the United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Hello, and welcome back to They've Got Stories to Tell, Conversations with Uncrowned Community Builders. I'm Barbara Sills Nevergold, and my guest today is Christine Castro-Parker, and we've had a fascinating conversation. The time has just gone by with, all the things that you are working on, and, kind of, I guess, the organization that you formulated is going to wrap around or help to formulate or help to house many of the projects that you work on with respect to John Brennan and elsewhere. So let's talk a little bit about the Sankofa Heritage Collective and what its mission is, and where you plan to go with it.
Okay. Well, the Sankofa Heritage Collective is actually exactly a year old, organizing the organization with its first set of board of directors, and we just completed our children's first art academy over at the Meriwether Library, and the overall mission for the collective, as I nickname it, is for the preservation, education, and empowerment of the African American arts, history, and culture here in Buffalo, and then of course celebrating nationally and globally, with our partners around, the globe. So our vision is to give Buffalo, and yes, on the east side, a brick and mortar, which we would house the many collections, entertain and host many exhibits, a speaker series on the arts, history, and culture, children's art inspired studio where children can learn about our art and the interpretation of art, and even host their own exhibits. So here it is, I'm training some new museum professionals that will come up hopefully out of this project. And then we know, of course, the archive. Our history is very important. And I think you've also have proven that with Uncrowned Community Builders, starting with the Uncrowned queens, and then kings, and now it's a full community where, research and family history, research can be produced there, and then taken and showcased in different ways that where we can educate our community and empower them. The center will be named after a very prominent person in our community, which I cannot disclose at this time. But the History Gallery is certainly going to be bearing the names of you and Dr. Peggy Brooks Bertram, because of the work that you've done. You're those pioneers that shows the value of our community and those persons.
So let me ask you, we have the Uncrowned Queens, we have the Afro-American Historical Association.
Yes.
I know for a while there was a group that was working on an African-American museum. I'm not sure where they are with it. We have the Colored Musicians Club that has now their own museum. We have the Nash House. So how do we bring all of these together? Because people might say, oh, well, we've got all these organizations. How do we bring these organizations together? I certainly think there's more than enough work for all of us, and we all may have a goal which says to collect and preserve African American history, but we're using a slightly different methodology and coming out with slightly different products as a result.
Oh, absolutely. And I think first is to be able to not only honor our ancestors, these pioneers, but also to now build and attract them as our community partners. And that's what Sankofa is doing now. I mean, we have a full schedule for next year where we're working with established organizations to, showcase our history and to celebrate it. And it's important, our community, it's time for a new structure. It's time for a new structure. It's already on the drafting table. Don't want to give any secrets away, but it's going to pay tribute to our heritage. It's going to celebrate. If anyone knows me, I'm very colorful. That's my heritage. I can't help it. So, but it's going to be a testimony for the 235 years of African American history here in Buffalo.
Well, you also have a vision, and I think that that it makes a difference. Not that all the rest of us don't have a vision as well, but given your experience, given your degree, and what you've done thus far, I see where you have multi-projects going at the same time, and I know, that can be difficult, but that also can be innovating and help to bolster what you're doing, because and sometimes you find out little things that you weren't looking for.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And so then you have to explore it.
You
Have to
you
be
have to. You're a historian, and that's what I recognized. When I started, the first day I started graduate school, I sat in the classroom building, the structure, and I said, "What am I doing here? The history and museum studies." I didn't see the connection. Then all of a sudden, I just started really thinking about it. I need this platform to tell those stories.
Right.
And there's so many more stories
There's
to be
so
told.
many stories. I struggle with that myself, with uncrowned community builders, how many stories there are. And by contrast, how many stories have been lost.
Exactly. Because, we're griots. We tell. We don't write.
Yes.
We have to get into the practice of writing. Even with archiving our own family history, starting with your children, writing, when that child is born, even when you're carrying that child, how to archive that experience and dedicate a volume or two or however many volumes it takes until you think you're done telling that child's story. And then that child can take those volumes and then add to their, through their adult life, their experiences. It's part of that experience. I can't encourage people enough. You have to document. Telling the story, certainly we have some great griots in our community, but you got to write it down. You got to document it in any way that you possibly can, because over time stories get lost. And those are treasures. Yes.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you've been here today to tell us your story, or part of the story, because there's so much that you are doing, so much that you're doing through Sankofa Heritage Collective, even though it's only a year old.
Yes.
You've been moving very quickly.
Yes. Very
So I hope you can come back. I mean, we really have some, as I said at the beginning of the show, the Uncrowned Community Builders and Sankofa Heritage Collective will be joining together to do some joint projects. So we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. This has been They've Got Stories to Tell, Conversations with Uncrowned Community Builders, a program of the Uncrowned Queens Institute. We invite and encourage you to visit our website at www.uncrownedcommunitybuilders.com to learn more about the lives and contributions of uncrowned queens and kings that we're talking about in this program. You can also watch this program on the UCB YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to your joining us for the next broadcast on the same station.